Really welcome everyone to the informal summer briefing of the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples platform. There are many contributors to this work around the world, and the aim of the Secretariat in this next hour or two is to give you an update of what happened in the mid-year climate negotiations, a little bit of a look into the future, what might be happening or going on that might be interesting for you at COP27 in Egypt, as well as a very quick update on the work of the facilitative working group of the platform. And so would like to give you an update and then give all of you a chance to talk, to have dialogue, an open dialogue, and really connect with each other and each other's work. So before we get started, this is the housekeeping, quite standard. We do have informal interpretation today. Big thank you to our colleague Paloma, who will be providing Spanish translation. You can access simultaneous interpretation down on the bottom of your screen, the right-hand side. You'll see a little globe icon. If you'll click on that and select either English or Spanish. If you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, please indicate that in the chat. And then in the open dialogue part, I'll be able to just moderate and pull all of you in so that we have a great conversation in an orderly way. We will be monitoring the chat, and we'll pass the virtual floor to those of you who wish to speak, and we'll do that in a sequenced way. And then finally, as usual on Zoom, please keep yourself on mute when you're not speaking. So with all of that housekeeping in mind, welcome to this informal briefing. My name is Coco Warner. I'm a manager at the UNFCCC Secretariat, and it's my privilege to work with this fantastic support team, and we support your work with the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples platform. And for those of you who worked hard to help parties establish this platform all the way back in Paris in 2015, you know that the purpose of this platform is to facilitate the exchange of experience and good practices between parties, those are countries, Indigenous peoples, and local communities to really achieve the aims of the Paris Agreement. So welcome everyone, we're super excited that you're here. Right at the end, I'd also like to introduce you to our team. Some of us are new and some of us are established team members. And we just like the chance to say hello because we're trying to serve you. Jesus, could you go on to the next slide? So let me give you an overview of, and next slide, please. Let me give you an overview of what we're going to do. We're going to give you some updates from the mid-year climate discussions. Those are called SB outcomes. This is we just finished the 56th meeting of the subsidiary bodies. That's a mouthful. And that is the mid-year climate negotiations. The facilitative working group also had its 7th meeting. We'll give you a little overview of what happened in that meeting. Some of you were there. We'll also give you an overview of all of the different activities that are progressing under the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples platform. And then we'll shift to the second part, and maybe the most important part of this dialogue today, and that is dialogue with all of you. We'll get started with a few questions on Menti, and then we'll go over to you and have a really active exchange. So that's what we'll be doing today. Next slide, please. So here's a quick update for those of you who weren't able to join us in Bonn, Germany in June. These are a couple of highlights. This looks like a lot, but maybe I can just elevate your view to what happened in the mid-year climate negotiations. What you see here, these very specific areas, are 4 of a dozen really exciting, very important work programs, negotiation items on adaptation, mitigation, finance, and other really important elements of our work. Now, the reason why we wanted to give you this update is that your work as Indigenous peoples, local communities, governments, and other stakeholders play a really important role in forming this work as it goes to COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and then on beyond to COP28, and of course, on beyond that. And so as we talk about the climate negotiations, I'd invite all of you to think about Indigenous practices and practices of local communities in areas like ecosystem restoration, or water, or building community cohesion, or food security. And I hope that during our dialogue today, you'll find chances to, in an appropriate way, tell us what are the practices, what kind of results are you seeing? And it's really exciting that we have parties or government people, government representatives with us today, because we're really hoping that you all will get to know each other better and be able to explain what are the practices, what are the results, what if those were done widely in the world? The world might look different, hopefully better. So the short answer for SB 56, a lot of work happened, and there were ample opportunities for people like you who are experts to bring that expertise and all of the things you know to inform the discussions. And these will keep going on at COP27 in Egypt. Also, just a note, these slides will be available in a slightly more detailed form. And hey, so maybe you could go on to the next slide already, on the meeting webpage. And so don't worry, you don't have to take screenshots or try and write everything down. You can have these slides and they'll be on the webpage for this informal dialogue. I mentioned a minute ago that the committee, the facilitative working group, it's not working program, it's working group. Sorry, just a little typo on our side, but this is the committee that supports the work of the platform. Next slide, please. These are the committee members, and what, as you know, is really unique is we have, for the very first time in the United Nations, 7 party representatives, actually 5 government representatives from parties to the convention who come from the 5 UN regions, plus a member from small island development states and a member from least developed countries. And then 7 Indigenous peoples representatives from the 7 sociocultural regions. It's a really unique membership and a really wonderful group of people. Next slide, please. And there you see it in words. Next slide, please. So what did we do at this 7th meeting? Well, some of you know, and some of you actually were members in the first cohort. Membership lasts a certain number of years, and then new members are appointed. And so in June, it was a huge privilege to say heartfelt thanks to the last cohort of members and invite 14 new members to this facilitative working group or committee. We have 2 new co-chairs, that's Natasha and Onel. Some of you know them very well as vice co-chairs. So we had some official business to do. And then there were lots of decision points that the committee members made together. For those of you who are interested in what was decided at this 7th meeting, again, the Secretariat has put all of that information on the webpage of this meeting, so you can go there and see those decision points. This is one of them. This 4th bullet point on the screen, the FWG members last year wrote a report that's informing the global stocktake, the first global stocktake of the Paris Agreement. And together, FWG members agreed that they'd like to update that report and include, again, more Indigenous practices and more good results that Indigenous peoples and local communities are getting using these practices, in order to show the contribution towards collective progress. So that's one of the many decisions that the committee reached together. We could talk way more, but you get an idea that each committee meeting is a great opportunity also to involve you as our community of contributors and reach decisions together. So let's go on to the next slide. Would like to give you a few updates on activities of the second 3-year work plan. We do a lot of our work at the climate negotiations. And so here's an example in this first column of some of the activities that happened at the mid-year climate negotiations. Intersessionally, that's the middle column. What you see is that there are 2 big gatherings coming up. One will be held for the Americas and the Caribbean regions. That's in mid-September. Another gathering will be held in the country of Chad in mid-October for the regions of Africa and Asia. So stay tuned to find out more about those regional gatherings. There will also be training workshops, collaboration with other committees under the UNFCCC. So a lot is going on in these coming weeks and months before the end of the year climate negotiations in Egypt. And this last column, you see again that a lot of the work, a lot of the activities of the work plan will happen in Egypt. So the bottom line for all of you as contributors is we would love to continue learning about your practices and getting to know you better. Please let the Secretariat know if you have plans to be at COP27. We want to invite you to come to the activities there, like the annual meeting or the multi-stakeholder dialogue or the youth roundtable. And those activities provide a chance for you to also get to know the governments and the parties better and to continue working on the collaborative work. Next slide, please. Now, just a few more slides from the Secretariat, and then in just a few moments, we'll actually start turning the time over to you so that you can have a chance to talk to each other. There's several ways that we would love to invite you to get engaged. So first of all, you can submit your practices and your ideas by going to the UNFCCC web page. And Chad, I would ask you to put the link in the chat. On my screen, it looks a little bit small. So for those of you who are organizations that are accredited to the UNFCCC, you can always write a very short paper. These are usually 1 page or 2 pages to provide inputs to the climate negotiations process. This second row that you see here is really, in some ways, has a very similar theme. Would invite you to share your experiences and good practices and results directly through the LCIPP web portal. This is a place that is a repository of practices and knowledge of local communities, of Indigenous peoples, and it's a wonderful resource to find out who's doing what around the world. And then the last point, just another way that you can engage, is to register and take part in these activities that I told you about. And you can do so by becoming a member of our community, which means just write us an email, and you see the instructions right there. So next slide, please. Wonderful. The Secretariat has now given you a few updates. I know it was a lot of information, but essentially, just to recap, the mid-year climate negotiations resulted in a lot of technical work where your inputs as experts are welcome and very appreciated. This technical work is informing the climate negotiations for 2 or 3 years ahead. The technical work will go into the climate negotiations in Egypt, and carry on to the next major milestone in climate policy, which is the first global stocktake of the Paris Agreement. That's going on right now, and it will culminate at COP28. And again, I'll repeat it again and again. This is a very special opportunity for you as local communities, for you as Indigenous peoples, to share your experiences, your good practices, and specific results with governments, and get better results, hopefully, because of that collaboration. So now let me stop for a minute, and I understand that we have a few, Chad, is it true? Is now the Menti, or does Menti come later?
Thanks, Coco. Menti comes right after the dialogue.
Okay, wonderful. Then, Jesus, do you want to take the screen down? Or the slides, rather? And Chad, I'm going to reach out to you to help us start the contributors dialogue.
So thank you, everyone, for joining. As Coco mentioned, this informal quarterly LCIPP contributors briefing, it is as much a space for us to provide updates like Coco just did, as it is a space for us to hear from you. So we invite you to really engage, and I open the floor. So the floor is yours. If you wanted to take the floor, please put your name in the chat or raise your hand, and me and my colleagues are monitoring, and so we will open the mic to you. Thanks.
And I'm changing the order just a little bit, but so that everyone has a chance to know what they might start talking about, would it be possible to put the Menti up now?
Sure thing.
Yeah. And so everyone, just to get the conversation started, we have a few questions for all of you. And if you wish, you can then talk about some of these questions in the dialogue. And so that Menti is coming in just a moment. And in the meantime, there you go. So for all of you, if you have a smartphone, you can hold it up to, well, you can use the QR code, or you can go online right here. You see that www.menti.com, and then enter the code. And could I ask a team member to put the web page menti.com as well as the code in the chat? And we'll give all of you just a moment to go to Menti. And then we're going to do the first couple of questions. It's really easy. This isn't a test. And so here we go. Okay. So all of you can go to Menti. And if we could go to the first question, and maybe for everyone, you could show this on our screen. We'll go slow so that all of you can follow along.
So far, we have 12 joined.
Okay, so either Chad or Jesus, is it possible to show that first question?
Sure thing. Jesus, if we could go to the first question. For those who haven't joined the Menti yet, the website as well as the code is in the chat. Thanks.
So here's the first question. Have you ever attended an informal contributors meeting before? This is a really easy question to answer. Here we go. Wonderful. Let's see. Many of you are regular contributors. That's fantastic. I see several of you are for the first time. Some of you joined us for the very first time right before the mid-year climate negotiations. We're having a little contest between those of you who have joined us many times and those who have not. So let us wait just a moment. And this gives a sense of, do we know each other or are we just getting to know each other? Okay, the numbers have stabilized and it looks like we're just a little bit heavier on those of you who have had a very first chance to get to know each other at least once. And for those of you who are new, welcome. We hope that we'll be seeing you much more often in our community, supporting the local communities and Indigenous peoples platform. Okay, let's go on to the next Menti question. We're curious, which sociocultural region do you associate with? Africa, the Arctic, Asia, Central and South America, and the Caribbean, the Pacific. So where are people coming from today? If you're not from an Indigenous peoples group or local communities, if you're from like somebody like me, these sociocultural regions can also, you might consider them geographic. So I, for example, I grew up in the Rocky Mountains, so I would associate myself with the Americas. So there you go. And indeed, today we have a lot of people who have joined fairly early. Oh no, is that Asia? That's Asia. Okay, so many of you are late afternoon, early evening. About half of you are joining us from the Asia Pacific region. It looks like 20% of you almost are from the Americas. And I beg your pardon, everyone, our Menti isn't situating, it's not perfectly situated over the map, but that's okay. So super, we have a really great geographic distribution and sociocultural representation. Welcome, everybody. Let's go on to the next. And just to give all of you a sense, the next three questions have the purpose of helping us understand each other. Why are we relevant to each other? What are we working on? What are the challenges that we face? So here's the first question. Use one word or phrase to describe key areas you work on related to the knowledge and practices of Indigenous peoples and local communities. Youth, I'd expect some of you work on food systems. So let's see, if you just let us know, what are you working on? Nature stewardship, adaptation, rights, self-determination, super. Also, it's wonderful. Also, feel free to put the words in your own languages if that's easier. Risk management, governance, healing the land, resilience, traditional knowledge. I'm looking if anyone is working on Indigenous food systems or water. So far, not. Ecosystems, languages by any chance. Great. So these are some of the issues that all of you as our community are working on. And just knowing that helps us hopefully connect better with you, as well as helping you connect better with one another. Let's go on to the next slide. Or the next Menti question. Now, this is maybe a harder question to answer, but we want to know what's important to you to make change happen. So, for example, if you were working on Indigenous food systems, and if the change was that Indigenous food systems are respected and maybe even scaled up to benefit all of humanity, just making it up, how does that happen? Is it that you bring your practices to governments? Is it that governments do things differently? Is it that communities get to know each other and share? Could you tell us, maybe just in a phrase, thank you, how should change happen? So here's a first answer: building alliances by bringing people together, Power redistribution, that's a big one. Great. Funding. How should change happen? Cooperation between different stakeholders here, community, government, scientists, and others. Recognition of Indigenous peoples as allies. That's wonderful. Indigenous youth participation can bring change. Promote Indigenous sustainable practices, maybe just scroll down just a bit. Another way that change happens, championing traditional and holistic land management. Another way that someone is saying change happens, change should happen with Indigenous peoples getting their sovereignty back. Another of you said community leadership aligned with national plans and policies, aligned with global goals. So it sounds like alignment is a big key to change. Another way change happens is changing relationships and moving beyond bias. Any policy must be based on existing field reality. Here's one in Spanish, I will read it. Construir alianzas para defensa y gobernanza territorial. Another way that change happens is here influencing food and land use systems. Here's another quite wonderful theory of change, recognition of Indigenous peoples and local communities as partners. I love that. It's what we're doing here together, bringing together your experiences and practices. Just approaches and wider lenses in all processes, participation, processes, governance. Okay, so it sounds to me like that person was saying that change happens when we bring people together in new ways or different ways. Change should happen with Indigenous peoples. We've seen that one already. Indigenous peoples and local communities participating, coordination between governments and local communities and Indigenous peoples. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Oh, here's one that's a little piquant. Promote Indigenous sustainable communities and maybe promote that instead of supermarkets. I think maybe there's more conversation to have there. I'm not sure if I completely understood it. Wonderful. Community leadership aligned, yep, with national plans, policies, aligned with global goals. Wonderful. Everyone, we're appreciative. We have one more question. So if we could go to, and I think this might be the last Menti question. Use a word or phrase to describe what challenges you face in the area you work on. So we have first, just to review, the area that you're working on. The second question was, how does change happen? And this third question is, what challenges do you face? So we'll just take a moment and let you think, what are the challenges that you're facing in the areas you're working on? Maybe it's harder for people to talk about the challenges that they face. Here we go. Most nationally determined contributions do not yet include Indigenous peoples and local communities. Another challenge, political reticence, slow recognition of the need for change. I like these. These are ignorance, intimidation of, I think this means Indigenous defenders, local community defenders. And again, acknowledging it's not easy to talk about challenges. Here's another one. not enough or lack of parties' recognition of the rights of Indigenous people, marginalization of needs, lives, and also the recognition of impacts, institutions that have not yet fully engaged and had Indigenous peoples and local communities at the table. Another challenge, more commitment and real actions on climate change for communities. In Spanish, reconocimiento de derechos de pueblos indígenas, acceso económico para los pueblos indígenas para que participen en las negociaciones nacionales e internacionales sobre cambio climático. Another challenge, or a set of challenges, land grabbing, continued colonization, and those values on the ground. These things affect everything from local level to national level. Another challenge, lack of recognition of Indigenous peoples as actors. And something similar, maybe Indigenous peoples are sometimes seen as an obstacle, not as a partner. Another challenge, funding is going to short-term political issues rather than long-term stewardship. Here's an interesting one. Experts are not sharing their expertise or spaces. That one, all of these are really important to know about, but this one about sharing expertise and creating a space for sharing is something that the local communities and Indigenous peoples platform hopefully can help start addressing. This platform is for you to share your experiences. That's the purpose. And I'll read one or two, and then we can close this Menti, and hopefully this gives you lots of things to talk about for the next 20 minutes or so, and then we'll keep moving our program forward. Las acciones locales deben ser articuladas con las acciones nacionales y esto con las acciones globales. Again, that alignment. Another challenge, use of Indigenous language is not common at the national and global levels. Greed is a challenge. Great, thank you everyone. We really appreciate your candor in letting us know what are you working on, how change happens or how it could happen, what are the pathways to getting change, and then some of your challenges. Jesus, maybe you can take down the slides. And now a few of you, or at least one of you, have raised your hands. If you'd like to hop in and offer a comment and get the conversation started, just raise your hand or put your name in the chat, and I'll just moderate as we go through. So Diana Eam, I see your hand raised. Would love to have you come into the conversation. And again, Diana, would you like to make a comment? Okay, it may be that Diana's having a hard time with her microphone. Danielle Santi.
Muy buenos días. Un saludo desde Ecuador.
Good morning and hello from Ecuador to everyone at the platform, as well as people from all the 7 regions here today. I think this is very important. I have been following all the reports from the platform, as well as the UNFCCC, and I was following the work happening in June in Bonn. And I think it is important that this platform constitutes an institution defined with expert groups, technical expert groups from people from the 7 regions. I think because it's the only instance recognized by the UN, I think that the work should be more solid and focalized and really highlight what all the 7 regions are doing as well as national actions and how they connect to global actions. Right now, there's a big gap between what happens at the global level, and they are not being reflected at the national actions, and even worse, local actions. And local action is not recognized at the national or global level. So I can see a divorce or a gap between those. And if we continue this way, we cannot have good results at the medium or long term. So I think this platform would be important to request the UN enough funds so that the technical experts from the 7 regions can really work at climate action at different levels. Indigenous peoples have 2 main problems: the right to legal security, as we do not have rights to our territories. We are susceptible, vulnerable to different extractive activities. Also, we are the stewards of a big territory at the global level with 80% of biodiversity. We really need for states and the Framework Convention to pressure governments to really protect and give security to the indigenous peoples. The second point is that the indigenous peoples should work from the platform on a general funding framework that is accessible for the 7 regions. And this funding platform should give guidance and methodologies on how funds can really go to the indigenous peoples. Otherwise, all these resources established by the UN funds will just be used by international agencies, but the indigenous peoples would still struggle and they would not really receive the support. For example, the Glasgow finance commitment has not been fulfilled. And particularly, this has not been mobilized for indigenous peoples. There's 3 different financing systems. The first one is the Red Plus. Second one is the private and public entities. And the third one is the NGOs. So in this funding mechanism for indigenous peoples, could in COP27 propose that the UN recognizes a 4th way for funding for indigenous peoples, as we are the main defenders of the territory. And we are defending a territory that is really important for carbon capture. So our contribution should be valued. Thank you very much.
Daniel, thank you very much. So for all of you, Daniel was talking about the importance of funding and mentioned different things like climate finance. Daniel, if you think it would be helpful to indigenous peoples and local communities, as well as other organizations, the Secretariat could try to organize a briefing for indigenous peoples, local communities, interested stakeholders, just around means of implementation. That's finance, technology, capacity. And we could try to do that before COP27 if it's useful. It doesn't quite address your really important points, but if that's helpful to help kind of bring you together, just write to the email that I put in the chat, and we can then maybe collaborate on that. It's just an idea to try and keep that conversation moving forward that you've brought up. Next, I have Ruth and then Matior. Thank you, Daniel. Ruth?
Okay, you hearing me? Okay. I have been concerned about the involvement of other Caribbean countries in not only the UNFCCC processes, but a lot of conventions, because when you join the meetings, you're not seeing them. You're not seeing the local groups, you're not seeing the NGOs. And sometimes I wonder if the groups are not getting the information. I think a start is if we can get the governments to ratify the ESCAZO agreement. This came from the 1992 Rio Summit, and it's just now coming into force. So I have been trying to think ahead, and I'm trying to build collaborations with government stakeholders, CSOs in the other Caribbean islands. I've actually visited Dominica and Grenada, which are two countries that have not ratified. Just this week, I wrote to the government, the cabinet of Grenada. A new government was sworn into power, and I'm asking them for an opportunity to come and share with them, because if governments don't ratify, it means that the voices, new voices for environmental decision-making are being left out. And as we move toward people-centered development, we need all of society to solve the triple crisis. So what I want to advocate to my fellow colleagues, we got to think out of the box. You have to take on new roles and responsibilities to get the messages out. If people are so important in providing solutions, the LCIP groups, we have to be recognized, our voices have to be heard. So I am taking some bold steps, and what I'm doing, I'm reaching out to judges, judiciary persons, to come on board, because I think the power of the judiciary will make things happen. So already I've engaged a retired judge, and she's been so supportive. So I'm using these collaborative platforms now to reach governments within the Caribbean, to advocate for our local community groups. We want to see more voices. We want to see new faces. So thank you, Coco, for this opportunity to share. Thank you.
Wonderful, Ruth. And I think many of us are fans of your excitement and your power moving things forward. Thank you so much. Also, Ruth, you may want to talk with Elvira Guterres. Elvira is helping to set up a national platform. So Elvira and Ruth, you may know of each other's work, but it would be wonderful for you, maybe if you compare notes and find out what the others are doing. And also, Ruth and everyone, for those of you who are interested, in the previous work plan, the Secretariat looked at all of the laws and, well, actually, that's not true. We looked at all of the policies under the convention that have to do with Indigenous peoples and local communities. So we have that resource, and this could be updated and refreshed, such as Ruth, what you are talking about. There are probably lots of things happening at the national level or regional level that's very pioneering and wonderful that we don't know about yet. So again, just encouraging all of us to exchange practices. What are you doing with the institutions and branches of government? Ruth, I'm just saying branches of government because the judiciary often is. What are you doing, and where are you seeing good progress and results? Super exciting. Thank you, Ruth. Maybe also just a couple of connections that you can make. Moving on, Matiur Raman.
Yes, hello. Hello, yes, I am
Yes,
from
we can
Assam.
hear you. Hi.
Hi, I want to say that in the name of capital extension, in Assam, the government of Assam grossly violated the UNRIP and the rights of indigenous people without prior informed or consent. The Tiwa community of indigenous people's land occupied by the government. And when our people, Tiwa people, protest in this matter, then the police arrest the young Tiwa people and tortured. So in this way, in Assam, an Indian state, the gross violation is going on against the UNRIP. So in this situation, how can help us by the global community to our indigenous people of Assam? Please. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Also, for all of you, if you have resources, case studies, if you want to share more information, please feel free to send that to the Secretariat. I'll put our email address again in the chat box. And I just welcome you, Matior, and others to share the information and what you're doing. We can have the facilitated working group review those materials and then put the appropriate material on the LCIPP webpage. Thank you so much. I'd like to go now over to Nailejilehi Tipap.
Thank you so much, Coco, and thank you for this platform. I'm Nailejilehi Tipap. I work I'm from Tanzania. I work with Pastoralists, Indigenous NGO Forum. We work with the Indigenous Pastoralists and Hunter and Gatherers community in Tanzania. I'm very glad to be part of this platform, and I just had the issue of more collaboration of the indigenous people with the government, specifically in what you are expressing based on climate change. But most of these states that we come from, speaking from the country that I come from, Tanzania, there is a number of the misleading based on the issues of indigenous people. Specifically, a number of evictions have been done, and most of the affected people who are primarily affected are women and children and the elderly. But the notion of many governments, and I'm very glad that if they're even part, they should understand. Most of the indigenous communities are custodian of land or conservation, but we are coming into the community that most of the condemned and even abused because of what they are doing is the indigenous people. Currently in my country, we are facing a very huge eviction to the pastoralist indigenous communities in areas like Ngorongoro, which is very speculated all over the world now, and even in Loliondo. And mainly, we are forgetting that we are all passing through a very pregnant program that is going on now of the issues of climate change, but that is put aside, but the indigenous people remain to be victims of their own custodian of the conservation. So I wanted just to put out this platform like this, and I thank that you answered a few questions that we can even write to you and try to see all these issues. But it is good platform like this that work with the issues of climate change to go broader and even understand a number of issues of these communities that we are saying they're indigenous people. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Naileji. Really important thoughts. And in addition to the local communities and Indigenous peoples platform, I noticed from our participant list that we have other colleagues from the United Nations system. We also have governments here. And of course, all of you in your own Indigenous peoples networks, local community networks. And I'd really invite you to just hop in and talk with one another. Some of the concerns that that you just pointed out, Nailechi, are also really relevant. Conservation, for example, Nigel, I know that you and Indigenous peoples and local communities under UNESCO have been talking a lot about these issues. Also, I have a colleague, Sheila Henry. I think, Sheila, you might be working with the OCHA, which coordinates UN humanitarian affairs. So just invite you, as you hear each other talking about things that you know a lot about, that you might be able to help each other out, please do hop in. I have on the list Deborah. You've been really active in the chat. Deborah, would you like to add a comment to our conversation? Okay, maybe Deborah's microphone is hard to activate. Sheila from OCHA, you had put a comment in the chat about the work that OCHA is doing. Sheila, would you like to come in for a moment? Not Sheila Henry.
Thanks, Coco. Yeah, my name is Sheila Henry. I'm working with the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. What we are working on is anticipatory action for climate financing. So we are doing a lot of research on areas that will be hard hit through climate change and natural disasters, through data points on what could create catastrophes in the near future, and through that coming up with funding from various sources to anticipate these and look at how we can fund prevention and adaptation as well as response. So I was just putting in the chat there that we would be happy if you are organizing a special session before COP to help explain some of these things, that we would probably be, we do localization as well. So we are looking at how we can combine our climate financing with localization. So we would be happy to work with you in a session such as that, as well as potentially seeing how we can better integrate ourselves into the this platform to help make the appropriate links between some of what's going on and some of the resources we may have.
Thank you so much, Sheila, for bringing that idea forward. I'm also looking at the chat. Dina Yuksuk, for example, thought the idea of a conversation, maybe a virtual conversation about some of these funds, resources, climate finance could be quite productive. So thanks a lot, Sheila. I really appreciate that. Nigel, you also put a comment in the chat. As we've been discussing some of the issues around Indigenous peoples and maybe land rights or other kinds of rights have come up. Nigel, would you like to hop in quickly? And then many hands are up and we'll continue on with you. Anything you'd like to add, Nigel?
Thank you, Coco. I think, you know, it was such a big breakthrough when the parties to the convention created the LCIPP, and it's a place where a lot of knowledge can be exchanged and where strategies can be developed, and it can inform the whole of the climate agenda, and that's a great opportunity. I think we know that a lot of people come with concerns about their specific human rights situations or territorial situations, and just, this is maybe not very popular, but I think it's important to understand, is the convention is not primarily a human rights convention. So there are different functions within the UN system. There's an entire body, an entire expert group within the UN dedicated to human rights, including dealing with removals or other threats. So all we say to you is know that the UN is there for you and can assist. Obviously, each situation is different, but there are mechanisms. If there's something urgent happening, you can directly contact the UN Special Rapporteur on the rights of indigenous peoples. You do need to provide some documentation of what is going on. And there's also other processes, obviously your National Human Rights Commission, but also the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights is very supportive. There's increasingly work on looking at the relationship between climate change and human rights. This is going to affect all of us. I mean, and there's just been, a resolution by the General Assembly to recognize the right to a safe environment, the right to a healthy and safe environment. So I think in this process, bring your issues, talk about what you need. But in terms of recourse actions, if you need the UN to move quickly on something, then use the human rights instrumentation within the UN system. And all of us are available to support you to try to find out where you need to go with that. I also think that some of the advocacy around recognizing rights and territoriality as part of national adaptation, as part of mitigation, is also a really valuable way to approach things. And what we're seeing is governments are rethinking some of their relationships around, the decisions they need to make around industry, agriculture, and actually what the communities need. So we are available if anybody needs some more information. Thanks. Back over to you, Coco.
Yeah, thank you. Just want to say thanks to my colleagues from the UN agencies, and really just to strengthen what Nigel was saying. Our agencies often have different things that we focus on, but we really want to work together to support Indigenous peoples and local communities to bring your good results, your leadership, your good practices, and really create effective collaboration, such as with countries and other institutions. So that's our aim. Thanks a lot, Nigel. Really appreciate that. How exciting. Now, many people have their hands up. Jagat Baram would love to pull you in. And then after that, Gustavo, Elvira, Alberto, Cantuta. So Jagat, first you.
Yes. Hello, everybody. This is Jagat Baram, from Nepal. And I am affiliated with NEFIN. NEFIN means the Nepal Federation of Indigenous Nationalities. This is the umbrella organization of the all indigenous peoples of Nepal. And then I am affiliated with AIPP also. AIPP means Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact. And then I am affiliated with DGM Nepal, Dedicated Grant Mechanism Nepal also. And then in my country, Nepal, indigenous peoples are preserving and conserving the forest with their traditional knowledge, practices, cultures, norms, and values. But the forest law and the forest policy is not good for the indigenous peoples and their livelihood. So we are demanding IP's friendly forest, land, and environment law and policies in Nepal. And in Nepal, we are rich in water resources also. Yes, and we have many more mountains and hills. All rivers are started from mountains and follows to the hills to lowland. So we have many more hydroelectricity projects now. And then in the side of the different rivers, many more indigenous peoples, villages, and residents with their culture, lifestyle, traditional knowledge, norms, and values. And after the hydroelectricity project construction org, all IPs are displacing from there. Yes, and then after this, they are facing different problems like settlement, like cultural problems, like traditions, etc. So how can we do? Our government is not support us properly now. This is my questions. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thanks, Nagat and Jagat. For those of you who are in that part of the world, the Asia and Pacific, I really encourage you to connect with one another and keep this important conversation going. Thanks a lot, Jagat.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So next on the list, I have Oh, I beg your pardon, Elvira first and then Gustavo. Elvira?
Sí, buenos días. Muchas gracias. Un saludo.
Good morning, and hello to all our sisters and brothers in this meeting of the contributors to the platform, that we also join with a comment made by another sister before me, that we really need to mobilize governments, different UN agencies, and other actors, because between those who are already convinced, we won't convince anyone. We really need to knock on the door of other actors. And in this regard, from the Amazon's Treaty, Cooperation Treaty, we are really pushing. We have 8 member states, and we have a project for a regional platform of the Amazons. And this is very important because it's one of the most vulnerable ecosystems to climate change, and also has the biggest biodiversity in the world, as well as the huge cultural diversity of indigenous peoples. So we want to have the opportunity to support and cooperate with the platform and the UNFCCC work. And we really want to take this to the regional level. So regional processes also have a local outcome. And we need to do that through cooperating with governments. And we have expressed our intention to contribute to the work of the platform, as well as the second work plan of the platform and the facilitative working group, to see how we can escalate and generate synergies of these 2 activities of the work plan at the regional level, and also influence the policies at the national level. So what we want to do during COP, and hopefully before, is to explore how we can make sure that this work plan is not a limitation, but really the starting point of this incremental approach to really add on. And even though we have only one activity, if the regions are committed and we can support regions to really do other activities with the same approach at the national or regional level, this would be really important to escalate these 2 activities at this level. So our commitment as a environmental organization is to support this process, and also, of course, the indigenous peoples and local communities, and really have linkages with the public sector. So I reiterate one of the comments of our brothers, that really governments need to value and recognize the role of indigenous peoples in public policy. So we, for example, are starting a project to incorporate indigenous knowledge in the curriculum of indigenous peoples in the government structure, so that the official curricula includes indigenous knowledge, specifically on climate change. So we offer our support for anything that can help in this regard and in the platform. Thank you very much.
Elvira, thank you for that constant work that you're doing to build platforms and bring people together at the regional and national level. And thanks for sharing that information. So now we have 3 more people on the speakers list, and then we're going to transition to another conversation. But first, I have Gustavo, then Alberto, and then Cantuta. And Gustavo, before you offer your comments, what's coming next is a conversation with another committee under the UNFCCC, the committee that provides technical assistance on technology. And so we're really excited for that right after this round of comments. Gustavo, over to you.
Gracias. ¿Sí me escuchan bien?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Perfecto.
Thank you. So, hello to all our sisters and brothers from indigenous peoples and local communities. As I expressed in the chat, I am interested that the activities that we are realizing in Latin America to coordinate among indigenous peoples and local communities, for example, on the defense of territory, can be included as part of the activities of the platform. We are really interested to know how we could send this information so that it can be registered under the platform. Also, we have a specific case of success of defense of the territory in Mexico, facing a mining company who wanted to do an exploitation project, an open air project. That is one of the types of projects with the most harmful effects, environmental effects. And indigenous peoples came together for a case in the Supreme Court against this mining project, which was canceled. So I think that we need to have more trainings amongst us to exchange on these kinds of successful experiences. For example, how this Cancun safeguards that contemplate the effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities can be one of the elements that allow us to really make sure that we get our rights respected, as well as the previous and informed consent. We need further analysis on what it means full and effective participation, and so that globally we can really make use of this agreement that, as we know, that so many countries are part of the climate change conventions. So I really wanted to share this, and again, thank you all, everyone.
Gustavo, thank you so much. And I hope we can follow up on those specific areas that you mentioned. Alberto, and then after Alberto, Cantuta. Alberto?
Yes, thank you, Coco, and good day to everyone. the question of human rights and particularly indigenous rights have already been recognized by the COP, by the Paris COP, and they have committed to observe the rights of indigenous peoples according to the full Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, as well as particularly the rights of free, prior, and informed consent. So I think that we have to ensure that they do, in fact, recognize and observe the rights of indigenous peoples, particularly with regard to communities that are being affected by the denial of rights, particularly the evictions, the criminalization of indigenous peoples defending the sacred. With many of our elders are those indigenous peoples that are being criminalized, if not assassinated. Their indigenous communities, the local communities are intimidated. And so it's a very serious problem for us, and we hope that they will, in fact, they have committed to observing those rights. One way that we can penalize the violation of those rights is to discount their offsets from, as proposed by Article 6 market approaches, so that they, if in fact, those offsets are generated in whole or in part by the violation of rights, that they not be allowed to use those discounts against their NDCs. Article 6 itself is also a problem of rights, because it does in fact promote market approaches which really are not really inconsistent with the purposes of the Paris Agreement, which is to reduce emissions. Those offsets leave those emissions in the air. So things like RED Plus and RES have become land grabs. The creation of national parks and co-management have really promoted development within indigenous territories. So if in fact, we hope that the governing body will include a grievance procedure for indigenous peoples, particularly, that will allow them an accessible grievance procedure that will allow them to examine the rights of indigenous peoples in relation to the NDCs and discount those offsets. So a lot of states are recognizing that Article 6 itself works contrary to the purposes of the Paris Agreement, which is reduction of emissions. So they have in fact begun to start buy up those offsets so that they cannot be used in any kind of market approach. So in fact, many states are beginning to recognize that Article 6 itself is the problem, is a major problem of reducing emissions. And we hope to join that conversation. Also, there's a problem of corruption that we talk about sometimes, that the oil companies themselves are very powerful, and they have lobbyists within the UNSCC processes. So we're hoping too to be able to promote some sort of at least transparency by requiring people with conflicting interests to declare themselves, so that we know who is doing what within the convention. So those are some of the comments I would have. I hope that they will be able to, we will be able to promote and defend the rights of indigenous peoples within the UNFCCC. Thank you very much.
Alberto, thank you a lot. And some of the community may be really informed about what Alberto was talking about. And some of you who are maybe newer to our community may have been wondering, what is Article 6 and what is this? And so maybe the next time that we have a conversation, we could have clusters talking about some of these different topics that you've been talking about that are so important. Also, Alberto, I think that you and some of you who've been involved in the Article 6 discussions maybe played a role in a decision that parties came to in Glasgow, And I asked if Chad could find this subparagraph about consultations with Indigenous peoples and local communities. So look in the chat, we'll try and post that. And good luck, and whatever we can do to, help facilitate. Sorry, just muted myself. Then I'm just happy to keep that conversation going. Now we have one more comment from the floor, and Kantuta, you've been waiting very patiently. Please, Kantuta.
Thank you. Maskeros Kipawa, dear sisters and brothers. I present myself. My name is Kantuta. I am a Aymara from Bolivia, and I am focal point of the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus. We strongly support the recommendation for an informal meeting for funding information that our brother has made. I think that it is very important to get to know all of this funding information, since sometimes it could be really hard to get all of this information. We would like to share one good practice experience that we are having as Network of Indigenous Youth, and that is the creation of the Manual of Land Rights for Indigenous Youth. This manual is a toolkit for the protection of Mother Earth. So this manual has been divided in different parts. Firstly, human rights of Indigenous peoples, the history of Indigenous peoples in the international level, talking about the working group until the decade of Indigenous peoples' languages. We also have the information of the mechanism of Indigenous peoples, such as MRIP, AMFI, and tools for climate action and Indigenous youth participation, such as different treaties and conventions. I believe that this is one of the, there are not many manuals for Indigenous youth, particularly about Indigenous people's rights, and especially talking about land rights and the protection of biodiversity and the protection and to combat climate change. We believe that Indigenous self-determination and land governance is an essential form to combat climate change. And this was born thanks to two actions. Firstly, from the summer program from the Columbia University made by Professor Elsa. And I believe that this is one of the few courses that there is to comprehend all of the UN system. And also this was also born from our participation in the creation of the toolkits for young activists that we created with UNICEF. And this has both been inspirations to create this manual for Indigenous youth. And the beauty of this manual is that it's created with Indigenous youth voices. We have written it with our own words. And we finished the manual with 3 case studies from Colombia, Venezuela, and Guatemala, which we show that there are 3 good practice experience. One talking about the implementation of ILO Convention to combat a mining industry in Guatemala. And the other ones talk about the importance of Indigenous identity and the connection to land. And we believe we would be very grateful. Our objective is to make this manual available for everyone and for all of the Indigenous youth that are new to this space, which can always be difficult to comprehend. And we would be very happy if the platform could share also this document that we're creating. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kantuta. How very exciting. And as many of you know, because you helped shape the work plan of the local communities and Indigenous peoples, Indigenous youth are an integral part of so many of the activities. So this is really exciting what you're telling us about, Kantuta. I'd like to quickly bring in my colleague, Supriya. Kantuta, and for those of you working with Indigenous youth, or if you're an Indigenous youth, Supriya, could you give a little bit of an overview, the role that Indigenous youth play in our work plan and also some upcoming activities? Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Coco. I hope you can hear me. Okay. Kantuta, first of all, thank you so much for your inputs. And I think this guide that you were mentioning could be really, really useful as COP comes closer and Indigenous youth from regions want to educate themselves as well on what to focus on and on the process. I would definitely encourage you to use the submit a resource icon that Coco had mentioned earlier to submit this resource as well. On what Coco was mentioning, activity 8 of the LCIPP work plan, and I'll just put that in the chat as well over here, is concentrated on organizing an annual youth roundtable in collaboration with Indigenous youth and youth from local communities, as well as with broad and gender-based youth representation. So Kantuta, organizations such as yours, and there may be other contributors on this call as well, we would really like to hear from you as to how you would like to design this or what you would like to achieve from an annual youth roundtable at the COP. And so for this specific reason, we will be having an informal virtual consultation end of August to gather your inputs on how you would like to design this event, what you would like to see being achieved through this annual youth roundtable later at COP. We will share information with all of you, and we do have your email addresses, so we'll definitely share information with you. Please do register for this event, and we'd love to hear from you some concrete inputs on how we can best design this event. The details will also be put on the website as soon as they're concretized, so look out for the LCIPP web portal as well. Back to you, Coco. Thank you.
That's terrific. Thank you, Supriya. And for Kantuta and all of the Indigenous youth, as well as youth from local communities, Supriya, could you put a little bit more information in the chat if it's needed? Daniel, I'm looking at you and I see your hand raised. And you...
Muy corto, mi estimada Coco y compañeros.
Yeah, very briefly. I will send an email a bit more of this information, but I just wanted to share that in Ecuador, we have created a network of indigenous peoples that we just launched last month. And it's a very important initiative for consultations and consent from indigenous peoples that we are organizing with the government to create a national law on this. And I think this could also be useful as an example for other indigenous peoples on how all this this rights recognized by the Inter-American Human Rights Court can be applied in other contexts. And in my community, we have also worked on a certification on zero carbon. We, as an indigenous people, we have created our own certification on climate justice. And I think this is very important because during COP, we want to launch this certification. And this could also allow other indigenous peoples to access funds directly for conservation, private funds, but also from multilateral funds. And I would like to also share this under the platform. And also we will have something in the Indigenous Pavilion. We would be very grateful if this could be taken into account so we can launch this in the pavilion. And it has been really positive experience as it's the first pioneer initiative from indigenous peoples that has developed a certification of this kind. So having a space would be really important, and we think we would also have a space from the government from the Ecuadorian government in their interventions and events. So this is really valuable as well, so we can access funding, and I just wanted to briefly share it with you. Thank you very much.
Daniel, thank you so much for coming in again. And just one thing that you said right at the end, that working together with your government, but maybe other governments, perhaps we can find a way as our community grows and continues going forward. We have many government friends here in our conversation, and I know it's not always easy or comfortable for them to speak, and often you're listening, which we appreciate very much, and would love in the future to get ideas about how we can foster that conversation even more. And so for all of you listening, parties or governments, local communities, Indigenous peoples, other stakeholders, we're really keen to hear your suggestions. So Daniel, for you and for others who are interested in climate finance, we're going to shift gears now in our conversation and invite a brief guest speaker. And this is Nadege Troselier. I hope, Nadege, I haven't said your name too incorrectly. Nadege is a speaker from the Climate Technology Collaboration Network, or the CTCN. This is one of the institutions or bodies under the UNFCCC that's fostering support for climate technology. Now, Nadege, as you're getting ready to come in, perhaps I could just set the scene. Nadege is going to introduce an opportunity to engage with local communities and Indigenous people. And I'm just reading the name. It is Adaptation Fund Climate Innovation Accelerator, or AFCIA, Adaptation Funds Climate Innovation Accelerator. And this accelerator aims to foster innovation in climate change adaptation in developing countries, and hopefully with all of you. So Nadege, thank you so much for joining us. And then followed by that, again, we'll be able to, you'll have the chance to engage, ask a few questions. Over to you, Nadege.
Thank you so much, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you very much for the organizer for inviting us to the webinar, and of course, dear esteemed participants, thank you very much for being connected today. My name is Nadege Troselier. I am a CTCN focal point for the AFCIA project, and it is my pleasure and honor to be with you today. If you allow me, I would like to start with a brief introduction to the CTCN, and then a brief introduction to the specific window of financing. And then if you agree, we would just have a global overview of the opportunity for funding request focusing on climate change adaptation technologies, so that if any of the participants is interested in participating to the open call for projects, he will have the basic information to submit its proposal, its request. So with regards to the CTCN over the past 20 years have been implementing a number of UNFCCC decisions that have been addressed regarding the important linkages between gender and climate change. Gender equality and gender mainstreaming are increasingly recognized as imperative for the effective implementation of the Paris Agreement, which acknowledges that parties in their climate actions should be guided by respect for human rights, gender equality, and the empowerment of women. Most recently, a new UNFCCC Gender Action Plan was negotiated, and the Climate Technology Center and Network has a role to implement this one. Indigenous people knowledge of climate resilience and their global contribution to a sustainable management of our shared natural resources are critical to combating climate change and its impacts. Yet, their contribution often remains unacknowledged, and too often indigenous peoples have little access to the financial resources of foreigners for decision-making concerning the environment, which severely undermines opportunity for significant influence in climate policy planning and action. The mission of the Climate Technology Center and Network is to stimulate technology cooperation and to enhance the development and transfer of technologies and to assist developing country parties at their request, consistent with their respective capabilities and national circumstances and priorities, in order to build or strengthen their capacity to identify technology needs, to facilitate the preparation and implementation of technology projects and strategies, taking into account gender considerations, to support action on mitigation as well as adaptation, and enhance low emissions and climate resilient development. So a brief introduction now to the AFCIA program, to the financing window. In this context of growing adaptation needs for technologies and innovation, the CTCN is very proud to be a partnership with the Adaptation Fund to support the Adaptation Fund Climate Innovation Accelerator, also known as AFCIA. The primary objective of the AFCIA, administered by UNEP CTCN, is to support developing countries to test, evaluate, roll out, and scale up innovative adaptation practices, product, and/or technologies. It is done by providing up to $250,000 worth of technical assistance through the CTCN network. Three main elements are considered to identify and assess innovation in adaptation technology as per the Adaptation Fund definition. The technology should be new, existing, or an improved technology. It should be of two types, a hard or a soft technology, and it should be scalable. The AFCIA program already had 2 calls of proposal, attracting more than 205 applications and leading to the selection of 16 projects that are currently either under implementation or contracting. The third and last call for proposal is now open until the 30th of September 2022. It will allow the CTCN to identify 9 more projects to be supported. The application process is quite simple, and we strongly encourage all who have technology development or application ideas to apply through our webpage, ctcn.org. I would now like to share a very short presentation, maybe, so that you can better understand what the AFCIA is like. I hope I will be able to share my screen, and I will try, but I think it's host disabled participant screen sharing. Will it be possible to make me a presenter so that I can share my screen, maybe?
Thank you. We should be able to. Let us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It should work now if you want to try.
All right, thank you. So I hope you can see my screen. I will try to put the panorama mode. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So this is a brief presentation of the AFCIA program. I would like to go through a couple of points. First, an overview of a selected application that was selected through the 2 previous call for projects, so that you have a better understanding of the kind of ideas and requests that will be acceptable through this financing window. Then some features and maybe a very brief description of one of the success story. And then maybe a focus on the third and last call, which is currently open and for which we are really willing to receive requests and ideas from all the sectors, private, NGOs, civil citizens, as well as governmental entities. And of course, the last and normal point, if there is any questions, I will be more than happy to answer, of course. So as I was saying before, we have received more than 200 applications during the last 2 calls for projects. And from these 200 applications, 16 have been selected. So I wanted to give maybe the title of these selected applications so that each participant, each person connected today can have a better idea of what we mean by adaptation climate technologies. So we have, for example, one project in Burundi that the purpose was to test and to roll out an easily deployable water-filled flood barrier that can be used both during flooding as well as during drought time. So I have a couple of pictures of this technology that I will be able to show you in a couple of slides. Then we worked with Nepal on a climate resilient agriculture in order to develop a customized weather and climate information system. We also worked with Cambodia in doing a climatic assessment for subnational adaptation and the establishment of a local climate information system for climate change adaptation. In Vietnam, as well as in Zambia and in St. Kitts, we worked on water resources, on the water sector in different aspects. In Vietnam, we tried to work on a water resources management technology that will enable the Hong Ping Binh River Basin to adapt to climate change. In Zambia, the request was to map the aquifers in order to understand the water balance that the country was facing. And finally, for example, in St. Kitts, we worked in increasing the water supply system resilience by managing aquifers recharge and incorporating drought risk modeling as a planning tool for climate change adaptation measures. Finally, in Sudan, we are currently working in developing a flood early warning system. There are other technologies that have been selected, and I merged this slide for 3 different technical assistance that will be implemented in 3 different countries, Liberia, Ghana, as well as Mozambique, because the technology which is requested is exactly the same. All of these countries, these 3 countries, wanted to work on solar-powered irrigation systems. But the focus of each of these countries was very different, and that's why the 3 requests could be approved and could be selected. In Liberia, they wanted to test the solar-powered irrigation system in a very small community in order to see if the system could be easily maintained and easily accessible to the smallholder farmers. While in Ghana, they really wanted to analyze the possibility to define a framework so that the solar-powered irrigation technology could be standardized and make sure that when the market for this kind of product will be developed in the country, the future farmers could access reliable and high quality products. So they wanted to have a standard, a norm for these products so that the market could be developed and under very strong basis. In Mozambique, the focus was really on the financing mechanisms that will enable the smallholder farmers to access the technology. Because in Mozambique, most of the farmers are very small, and so the technology is usually not accessible to them. So what the technical assistance will be about will be to design maybe a pay-as-you-go or pay-as-you-use system so that the smallholder farmers can access and can finance the technology and make sure that they can benefit from solar irrigation forward system. Apart from this, the program is also working on what we call enabling environment, which will be developing policies, developing framework, developing standards that can help the country in increasing its resilience to climate change adaptation. And in the case of the 2 previous calls, one of the projects that was selected for enabling environment was in Bahamas, as we wanted to increase and to improve the quality of the street markets in order to provide spaces that will be safer and that will be in terms of renewable in terms of energy, more energy efficiency and more oriented towards renewable energy. And they wanted to make sure that the vendors that are usually street vendors could benefit from a minimum of legal recognition. So this is what we will be working in Bahamas.
Yeah. It's super interesting, Nadege, and I think all of our contributors see how really specific the focus is, as well as the possibility of technical support and grants. That's really terrific.
Thank you very much.
Nadege, if the Indigenous peoples organizations and local communities wanted to get involved, how would they do so? Could you let us know now, just at the close of your comments, how can people find out more or get involved?
Sure. So what I can do is just after when I close the presentation, I will be able to put the link to the web page where the ideas can be submitted. And there is a couple of criteria that needs to be respected in order to be eligible. I would just maybe go directly to the slide, I think. Here we will have some criteria of eligibility as well as prioritization that may be important for future people willing to participate to the call for projects. So one of the main criteria for eligibility is that the request needs to be signed by the national designated entity, which is the focal point for the CTCN. Each country has a national designated entity, and the contact of this focal point can be found in our webpage. I can also share the link when I close the presentation. So this is very important to us because as part of our procedures, all the requests that we receive need to come from the NDE. In the case of the AFCIA program, the process is a little bit different because anyone can submit their proposal, their ideas through our web page. So the filter that we have in order to make sure that the request has been discussed and approved by the national designated entity is that the request should be signed by the national designated entity. So this is the most important criteria. Then of course, it's important that the project, the ideas would be oriented towards adaptation to climate change. And it is something we will check, and that is part of the eligibility criteria, is that the request project ideas should be aligned with national strategies. So for example, most of the countries today have published their revised NDCs, and it's important that the sectors, for example, that will be treated within the project ideas should be aligned with the priorities defined by the country, either in the NDC or in a technology needs assessment or in an app or in any other strategic documents at national level. So this is very, very important to the CTCN.
Super. And then Nadege, in the chat, could you let our community know how do they get more information, or if they needed help connecting with the right focal points? If they had an idea, like Daniel, for example, Daniel Santi and others had different ideas about areas that Indigenous peoples might contribute. Could you put some contact in the chat box so that people can follow up?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm the person in charge of supporting the candidatures. So I can also share my email so that anyone that have an idea and before putting efforts into translating the idea into the right template, they would like to connect with me to make sure if the idea is aligned and how they can get in touch with the NDE, for example. They can always send me an email and contact with me directly, of course.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. This has been really quick, of course, but good to know of this possibility for local communities and Indigenous peoples to help contribute in this way. Nadege, thank you so much. And I hope that we'll be able to continue the conversation.
Of course, thank you very much.
Great. And for all of you, there's always so much to talk about. We had two more things that we would like to cover with all of you before we close our meeting in just a few minutes. So first of all, a request, if you want, if there's a person who participated in this call that you would like to connect with, if you want to use the chat, there's a direct message function. If you want to just write to that person and get in contact so that you can continue exchanging information and continue networking, I'd invite you to do so now before we close the Zoom call. Now, there are a couple of more things we wanted to connect with you about. There are important UN decades, and our colleagues from UNESCO, as well as the Convention for Biodiversity, are focal points for these important decades. So I'd like to invite our two colleagues. I know we have Nigel, and I'm just looking at my other screen to see who we have. Kapaj Conde, if I could invite you to share some of the information about the 2 decades that you're stewarding. Would love to hear that. I think it's biodiversity and also water.
Coco, if I also have to go to a meeting in a few minutes, so thank you for the opportunity. Nigel Crowhall with the Local and Indigenous Knowledge Systems Program at UNESCO, and UNESCO is leading 2 of 4 concurrent decades which are of interest to Indigenous peoples, as well as we're contributing to the 3rd of those. So the first one, many of you know about. It's the International Decade on Indigenous Languages. And we've been speaking about the importance of looking at the global action plan, which includes climate change as a priority area for the International Decade. And part of what we're trying to help people understand is that Indigenous communities, Indigenous knowledge holders, use their languages as ways to understand not only the physical environment, but also the atmosphere and the changes in the climatic system and its impacts. So we encourage anyone who's on the call to speak to your national government about your national action plan, that climate change can be highlighted. It can also attract resources for research and action. And also to say that the official launch, there'll be national launches happening around the world. I know that both Bolivia and Namibia are launching theirs on the 9th of August, but there'll be a global launch also in Paris on 13 December. The other decade that we're leading is the UN Decade on Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. As you know, the ocean is the single biggest biome and ecosystem that influences our climate for many reasons I won't get into. And we've just been having regional meetings with the Secretariat of the Pacific Community to look at an uptake on Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous people's participation throughout the Pacific region. And we're expecting to see similar processes globally. So you may, if you're in an ocean country, you may have already a national committee, and it's really important if you want to work on Indigenous knowledge, climate, and ocean. This is a great opportunity for you. And lastly, UNESCO is part of UN Water, so it's a consortium of UN agencies, and we're coming up to the midterm review on the Water Action Decade. And I won't give you my opinions on the subject because it's not been asked of me, but it's been an interesting process to try to ensure that Indigenous people are fully participating in the Action Decade. There was just a meeting of the member states in Tajikistan where they made a decision formally to invite the full participation of Indigenous peoples and recognize Indigenous knowledge and human rights and the role of youth and the role of gender equality within the midterm review process. So the big meeting will be in New York in March 2023. And as you can all imagine, you all lived through this, water is absolutely at the center of the climate agenda. So freshwater issues, ocean issues, And the language issues are all opportunities for you to engage nationally and internationally. And I think that Kapach will pick up the fourth one, the ecosystems restoration decade. And I will have to leave you in a couple of moments.
Yeah,
So.
thank you so much, Nigel. And I know we're throwing so much information at our community, but I think what you're hearing, there's so many opportunities to link and to get those synergies and to work with you who are doing work at the national and regional level. So we really just invite you to connect with one another, build your networks. We'll do whatever we can to help you strengthen your ties and bring those very positive practices to collaboration with governments and others who are doing this important work. Thank you so much. Kapach, Antonio Kapach, so good to see you. Over to you. Thanks, Nigel.
Good to see you as well. And yeah, I also need to leave to another meeting, but very briefly, yes, of course, we contribute with the Decade of Restoration, but maybe a bit also exciting news is that it's officially announced the dates of the CBD COP, which is taking place from the 7th to the 19th of December. Previous to the COP, we will have the 5th meeting of the working group, which of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And this is the main work that the CBD has concentrated its energy. So the 5th meeting will meet from the 3rd to the 5th, and then we move to COP from the 7th to the 9th. Among the now 22 targets proposed by the last meeting of the working group, of course, several of them address directly indigenous peoples, such as target on traditional knowledge, targets on access to benefit sharing when a traditional knowledge associated with the genetic resources can produce a product or could create benefits, monetary or non-monetary. These are all covered in the well, these are part of the discussion covered by the draft of the post-2020. So as we just announced the dates, and now last week we start the process of accreditation. Let me just invite you, if you're interested, to follow this process. I will put the links on the chat. The process for new organizations, these are the ones that are not already accredited. The deadline is the 13th of September, and it's a very well, it's a straightforward process. You send us your application, you send us a statement of your work in relations to biodiversity conservation, and additional other information that I will put in the chat. And yeah, we also have a voluntary fund, and that is open for accredited organizations. So if you want to also apply to the voluntary fund, you might need to start the process of accreditation. If you're new to this process now, it also ends on the September 3rd. And yeah, I might also leave my email in the chat if you want to contact us directly. We'll be happy to support. And again, within the CBD, and I know that this is now practicing all different UN agencies across the system, we're really trying to provide a platform for you to participate, for you to raise your concerns in regards to the issues within the different mandates within the UN. Thank you so much, Coco, for this opportunity.
So much, thank you. And would love it if you could put links in the chat. And for everyone, we have covered so much ground. And I know that many themes were coming up all at once. What we will do as a secretariat is we will take all of these links that have been shared, and we'll see a way that we can convey them to you. If any of you listen to podcasts or see things online, we'll essentially just keep track of all of the things like show notes that have been mentioned in our conversation, so that you'll be able to follow up. Onel, todavía estás aquí, Onel? Our co-chair, Onel, might be with us. He's the co-chair of the facilitative working group. Onel, if you're here, I wonder if you would like to say maybe a final word or hello to everyone. Of course, no pressure if if not. Onel, hola, hola, hola.
Buenos días.
Well, good morning. Can you hear me?
Sí, perfectamente.
Ok. Sí, buenos días, buenas noches, buenas tardes.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good night to all our brothers and sisters in this call. Firstly, I would like to say hello to from the facilitative working group as representatives of parties and indigenous peoples. As part of our work program, we would like to really share all information with all of you, and we hope we can continue this type of activities and really get the feedback from all your participants so we can improve and we can have input from all of you. You can also suggest to us any topics that you think the platform should work on. So thank you so much for your time. And I hope to see you all soon. And those attending the COP, we will have a session before the COP, 1st to 5th of November. We will have a session under the platform, and you're all welcome to attend. And I hope you can be with us then. And greetings to all and success.
Muchas gracias, Onel. It's very wonderful that you're here. Thank you. Everyone, the very last thing that I would like to do before we say goodbye for today is just to ask the Secretariat support team if you all could turn on your cameras. Everyone, these are the wonderful colleagues behind the scenes who are trying to serve you from our role at the UNFCCC Secretariat. So you met Supriya, Chad, of course, Jesus from South Korea. She's new to our team since this summer. Geeta, all of you know very well. And there's Onel. Hi, Onel. And then our most recently joined team member is Donna Lagdameo. Some of you may know Donna from her previous work on disaster risk reduction and her work with the Red Cross. Donna, we're thrilled that you're in our team. And for all of you, want to wish you a successful rest of the week. And I hope that you're having a very safe and good season. We'll see you all very soon. And thank you for spending time with us today. Bye, everyone. And also, Paloma, thank you for translating. We appreciate it so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, bye.
Gracias a todos, compañeros.
Ciao, Daniel. Gracias. Ciao, Elvira. Chaucito, ciao.
Chao,
Hi,
gracias.
Cantuta.
Gracias.
Yes, bye-bye, bye-bye. Have a good day.
You too. Bye, Jagat.
Yes, bye-bye, bye. See you again.
Cocos, escribí a tu correo y solicitando, ¿te acuerdas en la última reunión que me pudieras facilitar los datos de la Secretaría de la Convención para poder, o de la persona nueva y sus correos para hacerle llegar la nota ya de solicitud, por favor?
Ok. Sí, lo entendí correctamente. Sí, podemos hablar juntos. Sí. Gracias.
Gracias, Coco. El tiempo rapidito. Solo queríamos saber cómo poder optar por que nos puedan apoyar con financiar a dos personas para la reunión de